Hello? 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 What's going on, yo? Happy hump day! It is Wednesday, my dudes. We are trucking through this week. I've been on a pretty good amount this week. Pretty much like every day, almost. Monday, Tuesday, today. But yeah. We read through a few chapters last week. This is probably going to be the only reading stream this week. Tomorrow I probably won't be live. I got IRL stuff, life stuff to do, to deal with. What's up, Blissful? How's it going? You ready? Hell yeah. Be ready. But yeah, probably won't be on tomorrow, but today will be this week's reading stream. I'll get the video up this weekend. But yeah, I was trying to think and remember like what happened last week. I think there was that Beeblebrox dude. So the week before it was like whenever the Earth pretty much blew up. So last week was when we pretty much were Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect are on the ship, or like on that spaceship, like with the it wasn't Gorgons, what were they? Something Vogons. They were on there with Vogons, and they have like those little dudes that let them onto the ship because the little dudes like hate them or whatever. Because everybody hates Vogons apparently. But yeah, what else happened? We found the learned the significance of the towel. We, what was it? Yeah, that Beeblebrox or whoever dude, he, like, was becoming president, and he, like, threw a bomb into the crowd, and everybody was, like, happy? I don't know, it was weird. What's up, Ultima? How's it going, man? I think currently, right now, we kind of had, like, a little bit of a cliffhanger, which was the captain of the Vogon ship that they are currently on, is about to make an announcement to the ship. I don't know if it's to just that one or to like all of the Vogons, but he put a, what was it that he put in his ear? Let me see. Something like, oh yeah, it was a fish. He put a fish in his ear, and it like basically is like a translator for him to understand Vogon. Going good, you? I'm good. Busy, running around. I just got off work like an hour ago ish. I've been yeah, I like rushed to eat and do all the things, and then now I'm here. Sometimes I want to like push it like 30 minutes or an hour, but at least for these I want to try to stick to 6:30, just so that it's a somewhat relatively like permanent time, you know. Wednesdays or Thursdays 6:30 p.m. So I think we're doing good so far. But yeah, just for the rest of the stream too, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna finish that Lego bonsai tree. After we're done here, we're gonna do probably like an hour-ish, and then we'll do the bonsai tree, and then after we finish that, which we will be finishing that today, we're gonna play some, I don't know, either Elden Ring or Lost Ark. We'll see. What's up, Sean? Sean! Yeah, sorry I bailed. I was trying to get back on here on that, what am I saying? Words? I was trying to get on at 6:30, because I'm trying to, like, stick to that, but at least for the reading streams. The rest of them is kind of just, I go live when I go live. But, yeah. Reread. Come hell or high water. Yo, Elden Ring was fun yesterday. We'll see how it goes, but I had a good time yesterday. Yesterday was fun. I feel like I didn't really hit any huge like walls or barriers yesterday, and usually that's something that's going on, you know. All right, but anyways, we just kind of pretty much went through the whole recap. Now I was about to listen to what the Vogon captain is gonna say, so we'll see from here of where we go. Chapter 6. Howl, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, 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 gargle, howl, gargle. I'm not doing these. Howl, howl, gargle, gargle, howl, gargle, gargle, howl, slurp. Should have a good time. Message repeats. This is your captain speaking, so stop whatever you're doing and pay attention. First of all, I see from our instruments that we have a couple of hitchhikers aboard. Hello, wherever you are. I just want to make it totally clear that you are not at all welcome. I worked hard to get where I am today, and I didn't become captain of a Vogon constructor ship simply so I could turn it into a taxi service for a load of degenerate freeloaders. I have sent out a search party, and as soon as they find you, I'll put you off the ship. If you're very lucky, I might read you some of my poetry first. Secondly, we're about to jump into hyperspace for the journey to Bernard's star. On arrival, we will stay in dock for a 72-hour refit, and no one's to leave the ship during that time. I repeat, all planet leave is cancelled. I've just had an unhappy love affair, so I don't see why anybody else should have a good time. Message ends. The noise stopped. Arthur discovered to his embarrassment that he was lying curled up in a small ball on the floor with his arms wrapped around his head. He smiled weakly. "Charming man," he said. "I wish I had a daughter so I could forbid her to marry one." "You wouldn't need to," said Ford. "They've got as much sex appeal as a road accident. No, don't move," he added as Arthur began to uncurl himself. "You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk." "What's so unpleasant about being drunk?" "You ask a glass of water." Arthur thought about this. "Ford," he said. "Yeah? What's this fish doing in my ear?" "It's translating for you. It's a babble fish. Look it up in the book if you like." He tossed over the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and then curled himself up into a fetal ball to prepare himself for the jump. At that moment, the bottom fell out of Arthur's mind. His eyes turned inside out. His feet began to leak out the top of his head. The room folded flat around him, spun around, shifted out of existence, and left him sliding into his own navel. Oh, I'm not reading. Hang on. Whoop, 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 whoop. There we go. Hi, Tomer. The room folded flat around him, spun around, shifted out of existence, and left him sliding into his own navel. They were passing through hyperspace. "The babble fish," said the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quietly, "is small, yellow, and leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brainwave energy received not from its own carrier but from those around it. It absorbs all unconscious mental frequencies from this brainwave energy to nourish itself with. It then excretes into the mind of its carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thought frequencies with nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all this is that if you stick a babblefish in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix which has been fed into your mind by your babblefish. Now it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this. "I refuse to prove that I exist," says God, "for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing." "But," says man, "the babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance. It proves you exist, and therefore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. "Oh dear," says God, "I hadn't thought of that," and promptly vanishes in a puff of logic. "Oh, that was easy," says man, and for an encore goes on to prove that black is white, and gets himself killed in the next zebra crossing. Most leading theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingo's kidneys, but that didn't stop Ulan Kulufid making a small fortune when he used it as a central theme of his best-selling book, while that about wraps it up for God. Meanwhile, the poor babblefish, by effectively removing all barriers to communication between different races and cultures, has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation. Arthur let out a low groan. He was horrified to discover that the kick through hyperspace hadn't killed him. He was now 6 light years from the place that Earth would have been if it still existed. The Earth. Visions of it swam sickeningly through his nauseated mind. There was no way his imagination could feel the impact of the whole Earth having gone. It was too big. He prodded his feelings by thinking that his parents and his sister had gone. No reaction. He thought of all the people he had been close to. No reaction. Then he thought of a complete stranger he had been standing behind in the queue at the supermarket 2 days before and felt a sudden stab. The supermarket was gone. Everyone in it was gone. Nelson's column had gone. Nelson's column had gone, and there would be no outcry because there was no one left to make an outcry. From now on, Nelson's column only existed in his mind. England only existed in his mind. His mind stuck here in this dank, smelly, steel-lined spaceship. A wave of claustrophobia closed in on him. England no longer existed. He'd got that. Somehow he'd got that. He tried again. America, he thought, has gone. He couldn't grasp it. He decided to start smaller again. New York is gone. No reaction. He never seriously believed it existed anyway. The dollar, he thought, has sunk forever. Slight tremor there. Every Bogart movie has been wiped, he said to himself, and that gave him a nasty knock. McDonald's, he thought. There's no longer any such thing as a McDonald's hamburger. He passed out. When he came around a second later, he found he was sobbing for his mother. He jerked himself violently to his feet. Ford! Ford looked up from where he was sitting in a corner, humming to himself. He always found the actual traveling through space part of space travel rather trying. Yeah? He said. If you're a researcher on this book thing, and you were on Earth, you must have been gathering material on it. Well, I was able to extend the original entry a bit, yeah. Let me see what it says in this edition then. I've got to see it. Yeah, okay. He passed it over again. Arthur grabbed hold of it and tried to stop his hands shaking. He pressed the entry for the relevant page. The screen flashed and swirled and resolved into a page of print. Arthur stared at it. It doesn't have an entry, he burst out. Ford looked over his shoulder. Yes, it does, he said. Down there. See at the bottom of the screen, just above eccentric Galambatus, the triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6? Arthur followed Ford's finger and saw where it was pointing. For a moment it still didn't register, then his mind nearly blew up. What? Harmless? Is that all it's got to say? Harmless? One word? Ford shrugged. Well, there are 100 billion stars in the galaxy and only a limited amount of space in the book's microprocessors, he said, and no one knew much about the Earth, of course. Well, for God's sake, I hope you managed to rectify that a bit. Oh, yes, well, I managed to transmit a new entry off to the editor. He had to trim it a bit, but it's still an improvement. And what does it say now? Asked Arthur. Mostly harmless, admitted Ford with a slightly embarrassed cough. Mostly harmless? Shouted Arthur. What was that noise? Hissed Ford. It was me shouting, shouted Arthur. No, shut up, said Ford. I think we're in trouble. You think we're in trouble? Outside the door were the clear sounds of marching footsteps. The Dentracy? Whispered Arthur. No, these are steel-toe boots, said Ford. There was a sharp ringing rap on the door. Then who is it? Said Arthur. Well, said Ford, if we're lucky, it's just the Vogons come to throw us into space. And if we're unlucky? If we're unlucky, said Ford grimly, the captain might be serious in his threat that he's going to read us some of his poetry first. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. Vogon poetry is of course the third worst thing in the universe. The second worst is that of the Asgoths of Krea, during a recitation by their poet master Gronthos the Flatulent of his poem Ode to a Small Lump of Green Putty I Found in My Armpit One Midsummer Morning. 4 of his audience died of internal hemorrhaging, and the president of the Mid-Galactic Arts Nobbling Council survived by gnawing one of his own legs off. Gronthos is reported to have been disappointed by the poem's reception, and was about to embark on a reading of his 12-book epic entitled My Favorite Bath Time Gurgles, when his own major intestine, in a desperate attempt to save life and civilization, leapt straight up through his neck and throttled his brain. The very worst poetry of all perished along with its creator, Paula Nancy Millstone Jennings of Greenbridge, Essex, England, in the destruction of the planet Earth. Prosenic Vogon Gelt smiled very slowly. This was done not so much for effect as because he was trying to remember the sequence of muscle movements. He had had a terribly therapeutic yell at his prisoners and was now feeling quite relaxed and ready for a little callousness. The prisoners sat in poetry appreciation chairs, strapped in. Vogon suffered no illusions as to the regard their works were generally held in. Their early attempts at composition had been part of a bludgeoning insistence that they be accepted as a properly evolved and cultured race, but now the only thing that kept them going was sheer bloody mindedness. The sweat stood out cold on Ford Prefect's brow and slid around the electrode strapped to his temples. These were attached to a battery of electronic equipment, imagery intensifiers, rhythmic modulators, alliterative residulators, and simile dumpers, all designed to heighten the experience of the poem and make sure that not a single nuance of the poet's thought was lost. Arthur Dent sat and quivered. He had no idea what he was in for, but he knew that he hadn't liked anything that had happened so far and didn't think things were likely to change. The Vogon began to read, a fetid little passage of his own devising. "Oh, freddled Grunth Bugly," he began. Spasms racked Ford's body. This was worse than he'd been prepared for. "Thy micturations are to me as plurdled gabble-blotchets on a lurgid bee." "Ah!" went Ford Prefect, wrenching his head back as lumps of pain thumped through it. He could dimly see beside him Arthur lolling and rolling in his seat. He clenched his teeth. "Group, I implore thee," continued the merciless Vogon, "my foonting, turtling dromes." His voice was rising to a horrible pitch of impassioned stridency. "And hooptiously drangle me with crinkly bindlewordles, or I will rend thee in the gibberworts with my blurgle cruncheon, see if I don't." "Yeah!" cried Ford Prefect, and threw one final spasm as the electronic enhancement of the last line caught him full blast across the temples. He went limp. Arthur lolled. "Now, Earthlings," whirred the Vogon. He didn't know that Ford Prefect was in fact from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse, and wouldn't have cared if he had. "I present you with a simple choice. Either die in the vacuum of space, or—" He paused for melodramatic effect. "Tell me how good you thought my poem was." He threw himself backward into a huge leathery bat-shaped seat and watched them. He did the smile again. Ford was rasping for breath. He rolled his dusty tongue around his parched mouth and moaned. Arthur said brightly, "Actually, I quite liked it." Ford turned and gaped. There was an approach that had quite simply not occurred to him. The Vogon raised a surprised eyebrow that effectively obscured his nose and was therefore no bad thing. "Oh, good," he whirred, in considerable astonishment. "Oh yes," said Arthur. "I thought that some of the metaphysical imagery was really particularly effective." Ford continued to stare at him, slowly organizing his thoughts around this totally new concept. Were they really going to be able to bareface their way out of this? "Yes, do continue," invited the Vogon. "Oh, and, interesting rhythmic devices, too," continued Arthur, "which seemed to counterpoint the, he floundered. Ford leapt to his rescue, hazarding, "Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor of the, He floundered too, but Arthur was ready again. "Humanity of the Vogonity," Ford hissed at him. "Ah, yes, Vogonity, sorry. Of the poet's compassionate soul." Arthur felt he was on a home stretch now, which contrives through the medium of the verse structure to sublimate this, transcend that, and come to terms with the fundamental dichotomies of the other. He was reaching a triumphant crescendo, and one is left with a profound and vivid insight into, which suddenly gave out on him, or leapt in with the coup de grace. Into whatever it was the poem was about," he yelled out of the corner of his mouth. "Well done, Arthur, that was very good." The Vogon perused them. For a moment his embittered racial soul had been touched, but he thought too little too late. His voice took on the quality of a cat snagging brushed nylon. "So what you're saying is that I write poetry because underneath my mean, callous, heartless exterior I really just want to be loved," he said. He paused. "Is that right?" Ford laughed, a nervous laugh. Well, I mean, yes, he said. Don't we all, deep down, you know, the Vogon stood up. No, well, you're completely wrong, he said. I just write poetry to throw my mean, callous, heartless exterior into sharp relief. I'm going to throw you off the ship anyway. Guard! Take the prisoners to number 3 airlock and throw them out. What? Shouted Ford. A huge young Vogon guard stepped forward and yanked them out of their straps with his huge blubbery arms. You can't throw us into space, yelled Ford. We're trying to write a book. Resistance is useless, shouted the Vogon guard back at him. It was the first phrase he'd learned when he joined the Vogon Guard Corps. The captain watched with detached amusement and then turned away. Arthur stared around him wildly. I don't want to die now, he yelled. I've still got a headache. I don't want to go to heaven with a headache. I'd be all cross and wouldn't enjoy it. The guard grasped them both firmly around the neck, and bowing deferentially toward his captain's back, hoiked them both protesting out of the bridge. A steel door closed and the captain was on his own again. He hummed quietly and mused to himself, lightly fingering his notebook of verses. He said. Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor. He considered this for a moment, and then closed the book with a grim smile. Death's too good for them, he said. The long steel-lined corridor echoed to the feeble struggles of the two humanoids clamped firmly under rubbery Vogon armpits. This is great, spluttered Arthur. This is really terrific. Let go of me, you brute. The Vogon guard dragged them on. Don't you worry, said Ford. I'll think of something. He didn't sound hopeful. Resistance is useless, bellowed the guard. Just don't say things like that, stammered Ford. How can anyone maintain a positive mental attitude if you're saying things like that? My God, complained Arthur. You're talking about a positive mental attitude, and you haven't even had your planet demolished today. I woke up this morning and thought I'd have a nice relaxed day, do a bit of reading, brush the dog. It's now just after 4 in the afternoon. I'm already being thrown out of an alien spaceship 6 light years from the smoking remains of the Earth. He spluttered and gurgled as the Vogon tightened his grip. All right, said Ford. Just stop panicking. Who said anything about panicking? Snapped Arthur. This is still just the culture shock. You wait till I've settled down into the situation and found my bearings. Then I'll start panicking. Arthur, you're getting hysterical. Shut up. Ford tried desperately to think, but was interrupted by the guard shouting again. Resistance is useless. And you can shut up as well, snapped Ford. Resistance is useless. Oh, give it a rest, said Ford. He twisted his head till he was looking straight up into his captor's face. A thought struck him. Do you really enjoy this sort of thing? He asked suddenly. The Vogon stopped dead, and a look of immense stupidity seeped slowly over his face. Enjoy? He boomed. What do you mean? What I mean, said Ford, is does it give you a full, satisfying life? Stomping around, shouting, pushing people out of spaceships? The Vogon stared up at the low steel ceiling, and his eyebrows almost rolled over each other. His mouth slacked. Finally he said, Well, the hours are good. They'd have to be, agreed Ford. Arthur twisted his head round to look at Ford. Ford, what are you doing? He asked in an amazed whisper. Oh, just trying to take an interest in the world around me, okay? He said. So the hours are pretty good then? He resumed. The Vogon stared down at him as sluggish thoughts moiled around in the murky depths. Yeah, he said. But now you come to mention it, most of the actual minutes are pretty lousy. Except, he thought again, which required looking at the ceiling. Except some of the shouting I quite like. He filled his lungs and bellowed. Resistance is... Sure, yes, interrupted Ford hurriedly. You're good at that, I can tell. But if it's mostly lousy, he said, slowly giving the words time to reach their mark, then why do you do it? What is it? The girls? The leather? The machismo? Or do you just find that coming to terms with the mindless tedium of it all presents an interesting challenge? Arthur looked backward and forward between them in bafflement. Said the guard. I don't know. I think I'd just sort of do it, really. My aunt said that spaceship guard was a good career for a young Vogon. You know, the uniform, the low-slung stun ray holster, the mindless tedium. There you are, Arthur, said Ford with an air and someone reaching the conclusion of his argument. You think you've got problems. Arthur rather thought he had. Apart from the unpleasant business with his home planet, the Vogon guard had half throttled him already, and he didn't like the sound of being thrown into space very much. Try and understand his problem, insisted Ford. Here he is, poor lad. His entire life's work is stamping around, throwing people off spaceships, and shouting, added the guard. And shouting, sure, said Ford, patting the blubbery arm clamped around his neck in friendly condescension. And he doesn't even know why he's doing it. Arthur agreed this was very sad. He did this with a small, feeble gesture because he was too asphyxiated to speak. Deep rumblings of bemusement came from the guard. Well, now you put it like that, I suppose. Good lad, encouraged Ford. But all right, went on the rumblings. So what's the alternative? Well, said Ford, brightly but slowly. Stop doing it, of course. Tell them, he went on, you're not going to do it anymore. He felt he ought to add something to that, but for the moment the guard seemed to have his mind occupied pondering that much. Said the guard. Well, that doesn't sound that great to me. Ford suddenly felt the moment slipping away. Now, wait a minute, he said. That's just the start, you see. There's more to it than that, you see. But at that moment, the guard renewed his grip and continued his original purpose of lugging his prisoners to the airlock. He was obviously quite touched. No, I think if it's all the same to you, he said, I'd better get you both shoved into this airlock, and then go and get on with some other bits of shouting I've got to do. It wasn't all the same to Fort Prefect at all. Come on now, but look, he said, less slowly, less brightly. Said Arthur without any clear inflection. But hang on, pursued Ford. There's music and art and things to tell you about yet. Resistance is useless, bellowed the guard, and then added, You see, if I keep it up, I can eventually get promoted to senior shouting officer, and there aren't usually many vacancies for non-shouting and non-pushing people about officers, so I think I'd better stick to what I know. They had now reached the airlock, a large circular steel hatchway of massive strength and weight let into the inner skin of the craft. The guard operated a control and the hatchway swung smoothly open. But thanks for taking an interest, said the Vogon guard. Bye now. He flung Ford and Arthur through the hatchway into the small chamber within. Arthur lay panting for breath. Ford scrambled around and flung his shoulder uselessly against the reclosing hatchway. But listen, he shouted to the guard. There's a whole world you don't know anything about. Here, how about this? Desperately he grabbed for the only bit of culture he knew offhand. He hummed the first bar of Beethoven's Fifth. Da-da-da-dum. Doesn't that stir anything in you? No, said the guard. Not really. But I'll mention it to my aunt. If he said anything further after that, it was lost. The hatchway sealed itself tight, and all sound was lost except the faint distant hum of the ship's engines. They were in a brightly polished, cylindrical chamber about 6 feet in diameter and 10 feet long. Ford looked around it, panting. Potentially bright lad, I thought, he said, and slumped against the curved wall. Arthur was still lying in the curve of the floor where he had fallen. He didn't look up. He just lay panting. We're trapped now, aren't we? Yes, said Ford. We're trapped. Well, didn't you think of anything? I thought you said you were going to think of something. Perhaps you thought of something and I didn't notice. Oh, yes, I thought of something, panted Ford. Arthur looked up expectantly. But unfortunately, continued Ford, it rather involved being on the other side of this airtight hatchway. He kicked the hatch they'd just been thrown through. But it was a good idea, was it? Oh, yes, very neat. What was it? Well, I hadn't worked out the details yet. Not much point now, is there? So, what happens next? Asked Arthur. Oh, well, the hatchway in front of us will open automatically in a few moments, and we will shoot out into deep space, I expect, and asphyxiate. If you take a lungful of air which you can last... If you take a lungful of air with you, you can last for up to 30 seconds, of course, said Ford. He stuck his hands behind his back, raised his eyebrows, and started to hum an old Betelgeusian battle hymn. To Arthur's eyes, he suddenly looked very alien. So this is it, said Arthur. We're gonna die. Yes, said Ford. Except... No. Wait a minute. He suddenly lunged across the chamber at something behind Arthur's line of vision. What's this switch? He cried. What? Where? Cried Arthur, twisting around. No, I was only fooling, said Ford. We're going to die after all. He slumped against the wall again, and carried on the tune from where he left off. You know, said Arthur, it's at times like this, when I'm trapped in a Vogon airlock with a man from Betelgeuse and about to die of asphyxiation in deep space, that I really wish I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young. Why? What did she tell you? I don't know. I didn't listen. Oh. Ford carried on, humming. This is terrific, Arthur thought to himself. Nelson's column has gone. McDonald's is gone. All that's left is me and the words, mostly harmless. Any second now, all that will be left is mostly harmless. And yesterday the planet seemed to be going so well. A motor whirred. A slight hiss built into a deafening roar of rushing air as the outer hatchway opened into an empty blackness, studded with tiny, impossibly bright points of light. Ford and Arthur popped into outer space like corks from a toy gun. Yeah, no, right? It's good stuff. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a wholly remarkable book. It's been compiled and recompiled many times over many years and under many different editorships. It contains contributions from countless numbers of travelers and researchers. The introduction begins like this. Space, it says, is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Listen. And so on. After a while, the style settles down a bit, and it begins to tell you things you really need to know, like the fact that the fabulously beautiful planet Bethsalamin, that the fabulously beautiful planet Bethsalamin is now so worried about the cumulative erosion by 10 billion visiting tourists a year that any net imbalance between the amount you eat and the amount you excrete while on a planet is surgically removed from your body weight when you leave. So every time you go to the lavatory, there's a vitally important to get a receipt. To be fair, though, when confronted by the sheer enormity of the distances between the stars, better minds than the one responsible for the guide's introduction have faltered. Some invite you to consider for a moment a peanut in Reading and a small walnut in Johannesburg, and other such dizzying concepts. The simple truth is that interstellar distances will not fit into the human imagination. Even light, which travels so fast that it takes most races thousands of years to realize that it travels at all, takes time to journey between the stars. It takes 8 minutes to journey from the star Sol to the place where Earth used to be, and 4 years more to arrive at Sol's nearest stellar neighbor, Alpha Proxima. For light to reach the other side of the galaxy, for it to reach Damogran, for instance, takes rather longer, 500,000 years. The record for hitchhiking this distance is just under 5 years, but you don't get to see much on the way. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says that if you hold a lungful of air, you can survive in the total vacuum of space for about 30 seconds. However, it does go on to say that, what with space being the mind-boggling size it is, the chances of being picked up by another ship within those 30 seconds are 2 to the power of 276,709 to 1 against. By a totally staggering coincidence, that is also the telephone number of an Islington flat where Arthur once went to a very good party and met a very nice girl whom he totally failed to get off with. She went off with a gatecrasher. Though the planet Earth, the Islington flat, and the telephone have all now been demolished, it is comforting to reflect that they are all in some small way commemorated by the fact that 29 seconds later, Ford and Arthur were rescued. Oh my god. Sometimes my brain is just like, no. End of chapter 8, by the way. It's like, stop. You're not gonna say words this time. Islington. Islington and, what was the other thing? Oh man. Islington of Beth Solomon. Beth Solomon and it's like tongue twister and it's like 2 words. The planet robot. Wait, oh my god, there's a lot. Improbably drive. I'm gonna make a scene with deep thought. The planet robot. What to space? What? Yeah, making scenes are fun. This one was cool. I still gotta mess with the little chat box up here. Alright. Chapter 9. The computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because Reason was in fact out to lunch. A hole had just appeared in the galaxy. It was exactly a nothingth of a second long, a nothingth of an inch wide, and quite a lot of millions of light years from end to end. As it closed up, lots of paper hats and party balloons fell out of it and drifted off through the universe. A team of 7 3-foot-high market analysts fell out of it and died, partly of asphyxiation, partly of surprise. 239,000 lightly fried eggs fell out of it too, materializing in a large wobbly heap on the famine-struck land of Pogthril in the Pansel system. The whole Pogthril tribe had died out from the famine except for one last man who died of cholesterol poisoning some weeks later. The nothingth of a second for which the whole existed reverberated backward and forward through time in a most improbable fashion. Somewhere in the deeply remote past, it seriously traumatized a small random group of atoms, drifting through the empty sterility of space, and made them cling together in the most extraordinarily unlikely patterns. These patterns quickly learned to copy themselves. This was part of what was so extraordinary about the patterns, and went on to cause massive trouble on every planet they drifted onto. That was how life began in the universe. 5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up a pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent gulping like half-spent fish. "There you are," gasped Ford, scrabbling for a finger hold on the pavement as it raced through the third reach of the unknown. "I told you I'd think of something." "Oh, sure," said Arthur. "Sure." "Bright idea of mine," said Ford, "to find a passing spaceship and get rescued by it." The real universe arched sickeningly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with gobbets of jello. Time blossomed, matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. "Oh, come off it," said Arthur. "The chances against it were astronomical." "Don't knock it, it worked," said Ford. "What sort of ship are we in?" asked Arthur as the pit of eternity yawned beneath them. "I don't know," said Ford. "I haven't opened my eyes yet." "No, nor have I," said Arthur. The universe jumped, froze, quivered, and splayed out in several unexpected directions. Arthur and Ford opened their eyes and looked out in considerable surprise. "Good God," said Arthur. "It looks just like the seafront at Southend." "Hell, I'm relieved to hear you say that," said Ford. "Why?" "Because I thought I must be going mad." "Perhaps you are. Perhaps you only thought I said it." Ford thought about this. "Well, did you say it or didn't you?" he asked. "I think so," said Arthur. "Well, perhaps we're both going mad." "Yes," said Arthur. "We'd be mad, all things considered, to think this was Southend." "Well, do you think this is Southend?" "Oh, yes." "So do I." "Therefore we must be mad." "Nice day for it." "Yes," said a passing maniac. "Who is that?" asked Arthur. "Who? The man with the 5 heads and the elderberry bush full of kippers?" "Yes." "I don't know. Just someone." "Ah." They both sat on the pavement and watched with a certain unease as huge children bounced heavily along the sand and wild horses thundered through the sky, taking fresh supplies of reinforced railings to the uncertain areas. "You know," said Arthur with a slight cough, "if this is Southend, there's something very odd about it." "You mean the way the sea stays steady as a rock and the buildings keep washing up and down?" said Ford. "Yes, I thought that was odd too. In fact," he continued as with a huge bang Southend split itself into 6 equal segments, which danced and spun giddily around each other in lewd and licentious formations, "there is something altogether very strange going on." Wild yowling noises of pipes and strings seared through the wind. Hot donuts popped out of the road for 10 pence each. Horrid fish stormed out of the sky, and Arthur and Ford decided to make a run for it. They plunged through heavy walls of sound, mountains of archaic thought, valleys of music, bad shoe sessions, and footling bats, and suddenly heard a girl's voice. It sounded quite a sensible voice, but it just said, 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against and falling, and that was all. Ford skidded down a beam of light and spun around, trying to find a source for the voice, but could see nothing he could seriously believe in. "What was that voice?" shouted Arthur. "I don't know," yelled Ford. "I don't know. It sounded like a measurement of probability." "Probability? What do you mean?" "Probability, you know, like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 4 against. It said 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against. That's pretty improbable, you know." A 1,000,000-gallon vat of custard upended itself over them without warning. "But what does it mean?" cried Arthur. "What, the custard? No, the measurement of improbability." "I don't know. I don't know at all. I think we're on some kind of spaceship." "I can only assume," said Arthur, "that this is not the first-class compartment." Bulges appeared in the fabric of space-time. Great ugly bulges. "Ah," said Arthur as he felt his body softening and bending in unusual directions. "Southend seems to be melting away. The stars are swirling. A dust bowl. My legs are drifting off into the sunset. My left arm's come off too." A frightening thought struck him. "Hell," he said. "How am I going to operate my digital watch now?" He wound his eyes desperately around in Ford's direction. "Ford," he said, "you're turning into a penguin. Stop it." Again came the voice. 2 to the power of 75,000 to 1 against and falling. Ford waddled around his pond in a furious circle. "Hey, who are you?" he quacked. "Where are you? What's going on, and is there any way of stopping it?" "Please relax," said the voice pleasantly, like a stewardess in an airliner with only 1 wing and 2 engines, one of which is on fire. "You are perfectly safe." "But that's not the point," raged Ford. "The point is that now I am a perfectly safe penguin, and my colleague here is rapidly running out of limbs." "It's all right. I've got them back now," said Arthur. 2 to the power of 50,000 to 1 against and falling," said the voice. "Admittedly," said Arthur, "they're longer than I usually like them, but—" "Isn't there anything," squawked Ford in avian fury, "you feel you ought to be telling us?" The voice cleared its throat. A giant petted Ford lolloped off into the distance. "Welcome," the voice said, "to the starship Heart of Gold." That's a place with Bibelbrox or whatever. The voice continued. "Please do not be alarmed," it said, "by anything you see or hear around you. You are bound to some initial ill effects as you have been rescued from certain death at an improbability level of 2 to the power of 276,000 to 1 against, possibly much higher. We are now cruising at a level of 2 to the power of 25,000 to 1 against and falling, and we will be restoring normality just as soon as we are sure what is normal anyway. Thank you. 2 to the power of 20,000 to 1 against and falling." The voice cut out. Ford and Arthur were in a small, luminous pink cubicle. Ford was wildly excited. "Arthur," he said, "this is fantastic. We've been picked up by a ship powered by the infinite improbability drive. This is incredible. I heard rumors about it before. They were all officially denied, but they must have done it. They built the improbability drive. Arthur, is this... Arthur? What's happening?" Arthur had jammed himself against the door to the cubicle, trying to hold it closed, but it was ill-fitting. Tiny furry little hands were squeezing themselves through the cracks. Their fingers were ink-stained. Tiny voices chattered insanely. Arthur looked up. "Ford," he said, "there's an infinite number of monkeys outside who want to talk to us about the script for Hamlet they've worked out." End of chapter 9. Yeah, the heart of gold. Alright, this next one is super quick. It's like 1 page, but it'll probably be the last. Getting close to the hour mark. Chapter 10. The infinite improbability drive is a wonderful new method of crossing vast interstellar distances in a mere nothingth of a second, without all that tedious mucking about in hyperspace. It was discovered by a lucky chance, and then developed into a governable form of propulsion by the Galactic Government's research team on Damogran. This, briefly, is the story of its discovery. The principle of generating small amounts of finite improbability by simply hooking the logic circuits of a Bamboweenie 5-7 sub-Mason brain to an atomic vector plotter suspended in a strong Brownian motion producer, say a nice hot cup of tea, were of course well understood, and such generators were often used to break the ice at parties by making all the molecules in the hostess's undergarments leap simultaneously 1 foot to the left, in accordance with the theory of indeterminacy. Many respectable physicists said that they weren't going to stand for this, partly because it was a debasement of science, but mostly because they didn't get invited to those sorts of parties. Another thing they couldn't stand was the perpetual failure they encountered in trying to construct a machine which could generate the infinite improbability field needed to flip a spaceship across the mind-paralyzing distances between the farthest stars, and in the end they grumpily announced that such a machine was virtually impossible. Then, one day, a student who had been left to sweep up the lab after a particularly unsuccessful party found himself reasoning this way. If, he thought to himself, such a machine is a virtual impossibility, then it must logically be a finite improbability. So all I have to do in order to make one is to work out exactly how improbable it is, feed that figure into the finite improbability generator, give it a fresh cup of really hot tea, and turn it on. He did this, and was rather startled to discover that he had managed to create the long-sought-after golden infinite probability. He did this and rather discovered that he managed to create the long-sought-after golden infinite improbability generator out of thin air. It startled him even more when just after he was awarded the Galactic Institute's prize for extreme cleverness, he got lynched by a rampaging mob of respectable physicists who had finally realized that the one thing they really couldn't stand was a smartass. End of chapter 10. We will stop there. Yeah, alright, cool. Well, let me see. Let's take off this book here. We don't need you anymore. Oh boy, this was great. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll get this one up this weekend. Either, I want to say by like Friday, Saturday-ish time frame. It'll be up there. If any of you guys aren't subscribed, feel free to, just in case you miss one in the future. My time, like, might be changing this next week. I don't know if I'm gonna stream next week. Next week might be a little bit chaotic for me. I'll keep an update to you guys out on the Discord, but next week's gonna be crazy, and then after that, my times might be shifting a little bit. So just kind of letting you guys know now. But I'm gonna, whatever it ends up being, I'll keep to whatever the schedule is. It just might turn into slightly more inconvenient times for you guys, because my shift is going to be moving around, so my free time is going to be a different time than normal. Worst case scenario, like, I put it all up on the YouTube, and you know, I got a playlist going on there, so all the ones will pop up on there. And yeah, what is free time? I don't know yet. That's the thing. I have no idea. I can't really even like say, because I have no idea. I wish I did, but what's Dick Sword? Dick Scored. It's a social media platform. What is that? What is Discord? Honestly, because my mom was asking me what it was when she visited last time, and I was trying to explain to her like what it was, and I was like, it's kind of like a chat application, or it's like a, I don't know. I don't know. It's just weird. It's like not social media, because social media is like people posting their life, right? So Discord is like yeah, just like a chat server, chat website. I don't know. I'm gonna head out of here. I hope you guys all have a great night. And I'll be around. I'll be out in the void. You guys will see me. But yeah, have a great night, and thanks again for hanging out. Words are hard. All right, see you guys.